debater and you're not afraid of a fight. So why have your comments off? Just out of curiosity.
Well, I've turned them on for a lot of things.
On your shorts you do.
Right. In some of my lives, I think they're on, but almost as soon as I turn them on, there's photos of my family's homes.
Okay.
What's the address?
Yeah.
And at what point, and I just want to clarify,
Yeah, please.
I don't have to take that abuse.
Agreed.
Like, I don't come to work and slap the dick out of their mouth. Like,
kind of why do you have a disdain for informants, in your opinion?
I don't disdain them. I downright fucking hate them. Okay. That's okay. But see, this is why I can say it. That Jeff's crazy. He's on medication. I have a disdain for them because no man should ever go to prison on the words of another man, number one. Number two, in 90% of the cases you look at, the informant has done more vile and disturbing crap than those that are being accused. Number three, I find it oxymoronic when a man, Joey Merlino, because everybody knows who he is, goes in front of a judge, they can bring up everything he's ever been accused of, including murders and whatever else. Even though he's acquitted, it doesn't really matter because it's a character judgment. But yet, in that same case, you can't turn that around and say, well, let's judge the rat. Judges don't allow that. So for me, it's like you're walking in, you're already behind.
I'm going to tell you something. If you don't ever bother me again the rest of my life, I ain't giving them pension. I can't. There's good friends of mine out on the say. Well, he's divorced, you have to do his stuff. That's why I said to you before, you don't understand what the boss is your boss.
And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We're going to get into, excuse me, the bulk of the show here. And it's basically going to be about Raymond Patriarca Jr. versus Raymond Patriarca Sr. There's a lot of information. We're going to jump into it. Some of it's going to be a little repetitive, but just pay attention. And I think by the end of it, you're going to have a better understanding of not only just the Patriarca crime family, but just everything that's fucking happened to them, and why it's so imperative now with new leadership that they sort of go back into the well, so to speak. And so we're going to talk about the internal coup against Raymond Patriarca Jr., the power succession, and the collapse of New England organized crime in terms of the historical reference points from when Raymond Patriarca Sr. ran the crime family. And the decline of New England's once, formidable mafia power structure, it didn't occur in a single dramatic sort of situation or a takedown, but through a slow, grinding internal revolt. And at the center of all of that unraveling is Raymond Patriarca Jr., heir to one of the most disciplined crime families in American history. And what unfolded in the late 1980s and early 90s was less a classic coup with a single victor and more of a collective mutiny, captains, soldiers, and ambitious subordinates rejecting weak leadership, federal pressure, and a fading code of authority. And we're going to sort of examine how Raymond Patriarca Jr. lost control of the Patriarca crime family and how internal factions undermined him and how that internal coup accelerated the collapse of the mafia in New England. Now, are they still there? Absolutely 100%. But we're talking about their height of power versus where they're at now, okay? And so when we look at the Patriarca legacy, it was truly power built on fear and discipline. And to understand the coup against Raymond Patriarca Jr., we first have to understand the shadow cast by his father, Raymond Sr. From his base in Providence, Federal Hill, Raymond Sr. ruled New England with a near absolute authority from the 1950s through the early 80s. His leadership style was defined by ruthless enforcement of the rules, tight insulation between leadership and street operations, minimal cooperation with law enforcement, and strategic alliances with New York crime families. And under Raymond Sr., dissent was rare and lethal. The family operated with efficiency, and its rackets from gambling to labor control were stable, and they were insanely profitable. And so when Raymond dies in 1984, the organization lost just not its boss and sort of the greatest boss they ever had, but they lost its gravitational center. And so you're talking about an heir without authority, because Raymond Patriarca Jr., he inherits the title, but he does not inherit the fear and respect that comes with that. Unlike his father, Raymond Jr. lacked proven street credibility. He lacked a reputation for violence, and he lacked a longstanding loyalty from senior captains within that crime family. And while succession by blood was not totally unheard of, we've seen it, the Traficantes, the Marcellos, and et cetera, it was more deeply resented in an organization that valued demonstrated power over lineage. Many viewed Patriarca Jr. as a symbolic boss, useful for continuity, but not somebody capable of enforcing discipline, which was his Achilles heel. And that perception would prove to be fatal. And so when we look at the internal revolt, it's a coup without a crown, because the coup against Patriarca Jr. was not a single coordinated strike. Instead, it unfolded as a series of overlapping rebellions. Number one, captain autonomy. Senior figures began operating independently, kicking up less money and ignoring what they were told to do. And that was an unspoken vote of no confidence. When a boss tells you this is what we're doing, and yeah, okay, whatever, you've already lost it. Then you have what the number two facet of this, which was Boston versus the Providence tension, because the Boston faction, which was a long subordinate to Providence, increasingly rejected oversight, and Patriarca Jr. was unable or unwilling to rein him in. And number three, the other facet to that, which led to this, was the federal pressure from the government and informants. And as RICO prosecutions intensified, several members chose cooperation over loyalty. Each defection further eroded Patriarca Jr.'s authority, signaling that a boss couldn't even protect his own crime family or himself. And the fourth facet to this was the erosion of fear, because that's the most damaging, right? Patriarca Jr. failed to make examples of people who were dissenting. And in Mafia culture, unchecked insubordination invites just more of the same. And so by the early 1990s, Patriarca Jr. was boss in name only. And sort of the silent partner in the coup was actually law enforcement itself, because while the revolt was internal, federal authorities were its greatest beneficiaries. Wiretaps, informants, long-term surveillance exploited the family's fractures. Members who might once have had remained loyal under Patriarca Sr. now saw little reason to risk life sentences for a leader who could not protect them. And in effect, the coup created ideal conditions for law enforcement because it fragmented the leadership, it gave power to competing factions, and it reduced operational security. And the family collapsed not through some sort of dramatic war or event, but through attrition. And so Raymond Patriarca Jr. eventually, as we know, gets convicted and imprisoned, marking the symbolic end of the family's dominance. And while remnants of the organization persisted, the centralized power structure that his father built was gone. And the internal coup achieved what rivals in law enforcement could not do on their own. It dismantled the authority, and that made the Patriarcha formidable to begin with. And so the downfall of Raymond Patriarca Jr. would illustrate the central truth of organized crime, that legitimacy is enforced, not inherited. And the coup against him was not driven by ambition alone, but a collective realization that the old rules no longer apply, and that the man at the top could not make them apply even if he wanted to. And so when you reject weak leadership, the family sort of seals its own fate. The coup succeeds, but it left nothing worth ruling. And so I want to kind of take you through a little timeline, right? So the fall of Raymond Jr., like I said, was not the fall of a single betrayal or indictment. It was really a prolonged internal coup, slow, corrosive, and fatal, carried out by the very structure that he inherited. And unlike dramatic mob wars that are seen here in New York and other places, New England's collapse came through erosion. Authority drained away and discipline evaporated, and the loyalty became transactional. And so we're going to kind of expand on how the coup kind of unfolded chronologically, why it succeeded, and how it permanently crippled the Patriarcha crime family. And so what's the background, right? Well, it's the system that was built by Raymond Sr. And the foundation of the family was constructed by Raymond Patriarca Sr., who ruled Providence with an iron fist from the 50s through 84. And the key characteristics of Patriarca Sr.'s rules were centralized decision-making, severe punishment for disobedience, insulation of leadership from street crime, and strategic dominance over both Rhode Island and Boston. And Raymond Sr. did not delegate power lightly. Captains feared him, soldiers respected him, and rivals avoided provoking him at all cost. And the family functioned less like a loose confederation and more like a corporate hierarchy enforced by violence. And that matters because his successor inherited the same exact structure, but not the fear that made it work. And so when Raymond Jr. Inherits leadership through basically stepping into the role, it didn't come from consensus. Nobody voted him in. He just kind of took it. And while officially recognized as the boss, he faced immediate skepticism from senior members of his own family who believed that he didn't earn the position through street authority, that he lacked the temperament to enforce discipline, and that he was too exposed legally and operationally to law enforcement. And from the outset, his role depended on cooperation rather than obedience. And that is a fatal flaw when you're governing an organized crime family. Obedience is everything. Cooperation, listen, guys will get in line, but you got to force them. And so what's the timeline? Well, 1984, Raymond Patriarca Sr. dies, leaving a power vacuum masked by nominal succession. Patriarca Jr. then becomes boss, but internally, loyalty is conditional rather than absolute. Shortly after that, senior figures began to quietly assess how much authority Raymond Jr. actually had. And the impact of that was the coup started right then and there, not openly, but psychologically. From 85 to 86, there were early signs of defiance. Captains reduced their tribute payments, decisions were delayed, questioned, or even in some cases ignored. Enforcement actions against insubordination are minimal or non-existent, and the impact that has is authority is tested and found to be weak. In 1987, the Boston faction begins its pushback. The Massachusetts wing, particularly Boston North End, grows increasingly autonomous, meaning they're acting on their own. Local leaders resist Providence oversight. Patriarca Jr. fails to decisively discipline anybody who's causing problems, and the impact was regional fragmentation becomes normalized. Then in 1988, you get the rise of informants. Federal investigations intensify using RICO statutes. Multiple members chose cooperation over loyalty, and unlike Patriarca Sr., defectors are not swiftly punished. He did nothing. And the impact that brought was the perception that the boss cannot protect anybody, not even himself, and he won't punish anybody that does do something wrong. Then in 1998, the loss of revenue. Gambling, loan sharking, and labor rackets operate semi-independently. Kick-ups become almost inconsistent or non-existent, and the boss's role becomes symbolic rather than managerial. And the impact that had was financial control. The lifeblood of organized crime starts to slip away. And in 1990, the de facto removal of authority happens. Patriarca Jr. still holds the title, but not the obedience. Captains negotiate directly with one another rather than the boss. And the family functions as disconnected cells rather than a hierarchy. And the impact that has is the coup has effectively succeeded, though no replacement boss emerges. 91-92, you have the legal collapse. Prosecutions accelerate using insider testimony. Fragmentation makes surveillance easier and coordination harder. Patriarca Jr. becomes increasingly isolated. And the impact that has is law enforcement exploits those results of the coup rather than causing it. Then in 1994, you get the conviction and imprisonment. Patriarca Jr. is convicted and imprisoned. New unified leadership replaces him. The family never regains any centralized control, and the impact is the era of the New England Mafia dominance begins to end. And so why did the coup even work? Well, fear is not transferable. Patriarca Sr.'s authority was personal, not institutional. Once gone, you can't inherit that. You either have that in you or you don't. Number two, no swift violence. In mafia culture, delayed punishment is indistinguishable bull from permission. He lets things go. 3, federal timing. RICO prosecutions arrive precisely as internal discipline collapses, magnifying the damage. Number 4, there's no viable or alternative boss. Unlike New York families, no single figure has enough respect to unify the rebellion. And unlike classic coups, this produces no ruler. Those who undermined Patriarca Jr. did not build a stronger regime. They dismantled the system entirely. Short-term autonomy replaced long-term survival. And the family traded centralized power for temporary freedom and paid for it with extinction, to be real. And so the eternal coup against Raymond Patriarca Jr. was not an act of ambition. It was an act of abandonment. By withdrawing obedience rather than declaring war, the family quietly dismantled itself. And what they overthrew was not just a weak boss, but the last remaining structure holding New England's mafia together. And in rejoicing in that inherited authority, without even replacing it, the Patriarca family proved a final lesson of organized crime history, that power has to be and must be enforced daily or it disappears. And so the story of Raymond Patriarca Jr. is not the story of a rise or a meteoric rise, but of a slow erosion. Unlike his father, Raymond Patriarca Sr., who ruled New England with absolute authority, Patriarca Jr. inherited a throne stripped from the very force that made it powerful to begin with. And his tenure as boss of the Patriarca crime family coincided with the most aggressive federal assault on organized crime in U.S. history. Court records, FBI surveillance, and cooperating witnesses would ultimately depict a leader unable to command obedience, someone who was not able to enforce discipline or protect his own organization from collapse. And so when we look at Patriarca Jr.'s life and sort of leadership and prosecutions and the legacy through the lens of the courts, he just wasn't good. Because Patriarca Jr. was born into privilege, raised in Providence, grew up surrounded by guys who were feared and revered like his dad. And unlike many mafia figures, he didn't rise through street violence or apprenticeship. He just took it. And FBI background summaries from the New England Organized Crime, the NEOC, which is organized crime squads there, later noted that Patriarca Jr. was shielded from early exposure to street-level violence. And that came from FBI OC assessment files 1974 through 1981. And that insulation later proved to be very disastrous for everybody. And so his involvement in organized crime was a very gradual and slow, but it was mainly administrative. He ran gambling operations, business fronts, handling money flows rather than enforcement. And according to FBI surveillance memoranda, Providence Field Office OC squad files, Patriarca Jr. was viewed as internally as a legitimate facing rather than feared. And unlike his father, he never built a reputation for being a disciplinarian. And so upon his father's death in 1984, Jr. assumes leadership by lineage rather than by consensus. If they had voted, nobody would have voted him in. So when we look at a 1984 succession memo summarized by an FBI assessment of the Patriarch as a Raymond Jr., what is noted in the file says subjects do not demonstrate the same level of deference to the successor as was afforded to his father. And that assessment is almost prophetic because captains and senior figures complied publicly, but then privately would say other things. Tribute payments declined, orders were delayed or ignored, no immediate or decisive violence would ever follow anything. And in mafia terms, that's fatal. And so Patriarca Jr.'s reign unfolded during the rise of RICO statutes, long-term wiretap authorizations, cooperating witness programs, and FBI wiretap summaries from the late 1980s captured conversations in which members openly questioned the leadership of the crime family, something unheard of during his father's era. And we have one wiretap summary from late 1980 where an FBI agent marks, there is uncertainty regarding who has final authority. Individuals appear to be operating independently of each other. And that language later would appear in federal RICO filings. And so look at the case, United States versus Raymond Patriarca Jr. Jurisdiction, United States District Court, District of Rhode Island, charges RICO conspiracy, illegal gambling operations, and extortion. And federal prosecutors argued that Patriarca Jr. maintained nominal leadership of an enterprise engaged in racketeering, but lacked the centralized control exercised by his father. The government emphasized continuity of structure, but not effectiveness of leadership, which is a lot of the reasons why they could never get him on murder charges. The evidence would establish that the continued existence of a criminal enterprise, notwithstanding internal disorganization and diminished authority. So in other words, he may be the leader, but he's not telling anybody what to do. And so that distinction was very crucial because the mafia didn't need to function well to be illegal. And one of the most damaging differences between Patriarca Jr.'s era and his father's was the rise of fucking rats. FBI RICO Task Force filed 1988 to 92, multiple cooperating witnesses, captains and soldiers begin to testify, financial records corroborate wiretaps, witnesses would testify that kick-ups were inconsistent, that enforcement was weak, and that fear no longer governed the behavior of organized crime. And one cooperating witness even testified and said, "We weren't afraid like before. Junior taking over changed everything." So here you have his own men saying, we don't fear the fucking guy. And the relationship with the Boston faction was really at the pit of the problem because Patriarca Jr. struggled to control Boston, particularly the North End. And FBI intelligence reports repeatedly described Boston area figures as semi-autonomous, meaning they were just doing their own fucking thing. And that breakdown became the central argument in later prosecutions that would follow, where fragmentation made surveillance easier and secrecy harder because everybody's talking shit about each other. And as we know, Junior gets convicted and sentenced to federal prison in the 90s, but unlike his dad, he did not evade long-term incarceration. A judge, when he sentenced Patriarca, would say this case reflects not merely criminal conduct, but the unraveling of an organization that once relied on intimidation and silence. That's fucking insane for a judge to say. Because the judge is saying, okay, you're all fucking criminals, but you guys used to be an organization that followed the rules. You guys used to be an organization that intimidated the fuck out of people. What the fuck have you become? When a judge says that in open court, that tells you how bad things are. And so post-conviction, the FBI Organized Crime Task Force described Patriarca Jr. as a symbolic leader, unable to enforce any discipline, a transitional figure during organizational collapse, and those files consistently contrast him with his father, emphasizing that fear was not transferable by inheritance. And Raymond Patriarca Jr. occupies a very unique place in Mafia history, whether you realize it or not. He did not create the empire. He did not violently destroy it like Nicky Scarfo, but he presided over its fucking collapse. And his life illustrates a crucial truth about organized crime, that power based on fear must constantly be reinforced or it evaporates. Dean, are you listening? Because Dean will understand what I'm saying. Power based on fear must be constantly reinforced or it evaporates. You lose power and fear, you've got nothing. People that fear you will always be weary. People that don't give a fuck. And within 10 years of being in prison, the New England Mafia ceased to function as a centralized organization. There's a schism. And look, Raymond Jr. was not a reckless gangster or even a flamboyant criminal. He was something almost more damaging to the mob. A boss who could not inspire fear. How many guys can we say took over the reins of a crime family and nobody gave a fuck? Court records, FBI files, and witness testimony coverage on a single conclusion that he inherited the title but not the authority. And in doing so became the final chapter of the history of the Mafia's dominance. And so what are some of the difference? I went all out this week for you guys. All right. So Raymond Patriarca Sr., born in 1908, grew up. He was actually born in Massachusetts. I don't know why this is Providence. He was born in Massachusetts, but grew up in Rhode Island to working class family. Raymond Jr., born in 45 in Providence, It was born into the mob. If you look at their formative criminal experience, Raymond Sr., gambling, small rackets, bootlegging, loan sharking, street level enforcement, murder. That's how he came up. Raymond Jr., administration work, limited exposure to law enforcement. What about their rise to power? Well, Raymond Sr. consolidated control in the 1930s through alliances that were strategic. Raymond Jr. inherited the title in 84 when his father dies. What about their leadership style? Well, Raymond Sr., absolute obedience, zero tolerance for any disobedience whatsoever. Raymond Jr., symbolic leadership, inconsistent enforcement. So now you can start to see how when you put the two up next to each other and you look at things, you could see where the mistakes are being made. What about use of violence? Well, Patriarca Sr. was strategic, targeted, and rarely public. Rarely. Whereas Jr., minimal, reactive, and mostly symbolic. What about their fear and authority? Well, Raymond Sr., his fear, the fear he carried was central to his control. And the entire New England Mafia and even the Irish mob did what he said. Raymond Jr., he didn't have any fear. Members operated and did whatever the fuck they wanted to do. What about organizational? Well, Raymond Sr. was centralized. Boss, captains, and soldiers, he had a very strict hierarchy. When you look at Raymond Jr., it was nominally the same, but it fragmented because the captains didn't listen to anything he had to say. What about their territory reach? Well, Raymond Sr., Rhode Island, Massachusetts, he controlled every bit of it, every inch of it, and other places as well. Under Raymond Jr.'s leadership, Rhode Island weakened, and Massachusetts crews just did what they want, so they lost less turf. What about unions and political? Because that's always a big thing. Well, when you look at Raymond Sr., it was extensive. Construction, trucking, docks, leveraging contracts, unions, etc. He carried all of it. Raymond Jr. lost everything. He couldn't control anything. He maintained those financial links to those rackets, but couldn't control them. What about law enforcement? Well, in 1957, Appalachian happens. Patriarca is caught at Appalachian, but he avoided prosecution for the most part. Whereas even looking at Raymond Sr.'s life, very rarely was he caught doing anything. His son, don't forget it. Multiple indictments, multiple investigations. What about key murders? Well, you look at Raymond Sr., multiple targets killed for dissent or disloyalty. Teddy Deegan and et cetera, more guys. There was a reason for why he did what he did. With Raymond Jr., there was a lot less, but it was reactionary out of fear. Look at Raymond Sr., key indictments, rare. He avoided convictions, witness intimidation. He used that as his sort of an extension of who he was. Raymond Jr. didn't have any of that power. He was convicted under RICO for gambling and extortion. Couldn't even get away with that. What about organizational? Well, Raymond Sr. maintained empire for 30 fucking years. He was feared and respected. Raymond Jr. leadership collapsed almost immediately. What about their legacy? Well, if you're going to look at Raymond Patriarca Sr., he is the model of discipline, fear-based organizational crime leader. Heavy-handed when he needed to be. Look at Raymond Jr., failure on every level. Failure. So what's the timeline? Well, Sr. reigned from the 1930s through 1984. His empire grew. Peak control, Appalachian in 57. Raymond Patriarca Jr., 84 to the 1990s. Got it by inheriting it. RICO prosecutions and total collapse. So pull out your maps. You guys got your maps? If you want to know where to get the map, I'm going to tell you. Go to YouTube. Go to our community page. We posted the map. So go to YouTube, Podcast Warehouse, go to our community posts, click on the map and open it up. For anybody else that can't find that, go over to Facebook, go to Mob Talk Radio on Facebook, go to our posts, go all the way down till you see the map. You'll see J.R. Russo on the right and you'll see Raymond Patriarca Jr. on the left. Okay, so I'm going to give you like 10 seconds to pull up the map. Or just pause this and pull up the map. Because I'm going to talk about this the map you're looking at. Okay. All right. So if you've got your map up, obviously you can see the Providence headquarters and the Boston crews. You can see the lines of authorities, right? And if you look at Patriarca's power, especially senior, of his authority, those lines are insolid. Juniors are fragmented dashed lines. Skulls are for murders. Gavel is for indictments. And a lock and change is used for fear-based control. Here's an interesting wiretap excerpt. Raymond Patriarca Jr. Sr. was quote on wiretap, and he said, Providence is unique. We never saw open conflict. Jr. said, there is an uncertainty regarding who has final authority. You have a boss. You have a boss saying there's an uncertainty regarding who has final authority. If you're saying that as a boss, you don't have it. So other than Raymond Patriarca being utterly different than his father, what truly led to his demise? You know, could he have changed that trajectory the way things were going? And I think he could have, and we're going to discuss that too. But as Raymond Sr. passes it on to Jr., Jr. inherits a very powerful organization, but one that is already under intense federal pressure and internal strain. Unlike his dad, like we've said, and it's a reoccurring theme, he lacked fear-based authority and political insulation. And that vacuum sets the stage for an internal coup led by Joe Russo, better known as J.R. Russo, the Boston-based captain whose faction openly challenged Patriarca's leadership. And over the 1980s, Russo's rebellion, his factional violence, and alliances with other influential gangsters destabilized the family and contributed directly to the sweeping RICO prosecutions that ultimately would dismantle much of the fucking organization to begin with. And so we got to go back to 84 again when Senior dies, because he leaves behind a crime family that is deeply entrenched in illegal gambling, racketeering, labor racketeering throughout New England's throughout all of New England. And his leadership was always characterized by being ruthless, disciplined, and respectful, if not feared from both Providence and Boston factions. And by contrast, Patriarca Jr.'s tenure as a boss was marked by perception of weakness. He was described, as we said earlier, by law enforcement as being the titular head without the strategic instincts or enforcement credibility of his father. And though he was officially backed by the commission, excuse me, though he was backed by the commission and was aligned with certain families, especially the Gambino crime family, his leadership was not universally accepted within the organization. And so when J.R. Russo becomes an established captain within the Boston faction, that's when it becomes a problem, because before the 1980s, he was already infamous for his role as the hitman who murdered Joe the Animal Barboza. And I can tell you that that's not true. I can tell you for a fact, he's not the one that pulled that trigger. Someday I'll tell the story. But let me just put it this way. Before the Animal Barboza got hit in San Francisco, there was a meeting in the Florida Keys. Not a meeting, but people that may or may not have been involved in that were in the Florida Keys for a few days and went from the Florida Keys to San Francisco to take care of it, back to the Keys, and then drove from the Keys back to New England. I'm telling you that's what happened. I know for a fact. But I'm just going to leave that there. Anyway, Russo's reputation was he was a guy that was a seasoned enforcer with deep ties in the Boston underworld, and by the late 1980s, dissatisfaction with Patriarca Jr.'s ability to lead effectively had grown among the Boston crews, and Russo, sensing both weakness and opportunity, emerged, or at least was perceived, as a figure capable of reshaping the family's leadership issues and dynamics. And so in the late 1980s, we saw a spike in factional violence that reflected in the struggle for control between Providence and Boston. Obviously, William Billy, the Wild Guy Grosso, was an underboss based in New Haven, Connecticut, and an ally of Patriarca Jr. was murdered in June of 1989. That hit was widely attributed to Russo's renegade faction and was a clear signal of escalating internal conflict. And the truth of the matter is, and I'm not sure, Grasso's hit was ordered by the Gambino crime family, not by the Patriarchas. And we've talked about that before. Totally ordered by the Gambinos for other reasons. Had not a lot to do with Providence. And around that same time, Frank Salemi, a powerful Boston area captain and an ally of Patriarca Jr., was seriously wounded in a shooting that further destabilized the family power structure and illustrated how Russo's cabal was actively challenging the status quo. And that violence was not real. It wasn't merely just a local turf feud. It was a challenge to Junior's authority from within, something almost unheard of under his father's regime. And so by mid-1989, the internal strife had become so disruptive that Junior attempted to broker peace. And as a part of that tentative truce, he agreed to promote Russo to the position of consigliere of the family, giving him the authority and influence within the organizational hierarchy. And the truth is, that idea was manufactured and put into motion by none other than John Gotti, who then was the boss of the Gambino crime family. John and Raymond Jr. were friends. And John Gotti stopped in to stop the bloodshed. Russo was primed to kill Patriarca and anybody who even tried to get involved, and John Gotti steps in, and John Gotti goes to Providence and explains the value of life to Russo. And it was only then that Russo let it go. John agreed that if Raymond Patriarca could not be effective, that he should step down, but that no harm should come to him. And that was the deal. And it was John's hope that Raymond Jr. could actually usher in some stability by bringing in Russo as the consigliere. But that's almost a dumb move, but I understand what John was doing. Placate the guy. Bring him close to you. Make him your consigliere. When he's not looking, cut his fucking head off. That's exactly what John's mentality would have been. But John wanted the warring to stop in Providence. And the only reason why Junior Patriarca was not killed was because John Gotti stepped in. And a large part of Junior's issues was with his hesitance to kill Russo. He knew Russo was behind the coup and did nothing because Russo was too strong and too feared for Patriarca to do anything. And that uneasy compromise culminated into a secret induction ceremony in Medford, Massachusetts on October 29th of 89, where new members were made into the Patriarca crime family, and that was the first ceremony that was ever recorded by federal law enforcement. So when you look at Raymond Jr., he was soft by comparisons made between him and his father, but Raymond Jr. was not nearly as heavy-handed as his dad. And he likely came back to bite him in the ass in the end. In 1991, he was charged with 2 RICO conspiracy murder charges against Teddy Burns and Vinnie Lamoli. However, it failed to match RICO's standards because it was never proven factually that Patriarca ordered murders at his own behest. And there was also no proof that he was handing down murder contracts. The feds knew that the order would come from him. However, there was nothing substantial that proved that he used that in his authority, let alone ever exercised it. So in many ways, by not reacting and doing anything, he kept himself out of jail, but he lost his own crime family as a result. Even the judge called Patriarca weak and ambivalent, who had zero ability to enforce discipline. This is a fucking judge. And while that's a huge slap in the face publicly, it simply meant that Junior Patriarca would never be charged with murder. So in other words, he had all the power to exercise that right for somebody to go do some dirt. He had that ability, but he did nothing. And because he did nothing, they could not substantiate a murder conspiracy charge. Because that murder conspiracy, in order for it to be weaved into RICO, means a murder would have had to have been taken place as a result of a felonious criminal act. In other words, we went into the bank to rob the bank. I shot the clerk. That's when the RICO can be used to enhance the penalties because you're using it in the commission of a crime. Even FBI agents were tipped by an informant and prepared with concealing recording equipment captured not only the making ceremony, but Russo's dominant vocal role in the fucking meeting. In that recording, Russo can be heard presiding over the oaths, warning the new inductees of lethal seriousness of their commitments and laying out his vision of what loyalty is. And this surveillance was a turning point because it provided concrete evidence of the existence of a structured criminal society, previously denied or at least obscured and exposed by the internal negotiations and factional dynamics that had been hidden to outsiders. And then in March of 1990, a sweeping RICO indictment drops, and it returns against Patriarca Jr., Russo, and Nicky Bianco, and more than 20 other reputed family members and associates. The charges included racketeering, conspiracy, extortion, narcotics trafficking, gambling, and murder. The indictment referenced the electronic surveillance of the Medford induction ceremony, identifying Patriarca Jr. and Russo as defendants in the same RICO enterprise. Russo and several co-defendants were arrested and charged under federal statutes designed to dismantle organized crime networks. Russo would eventually plead guilty in 1992 to racketeering charges, including his role in Barbosa's murder, extortion, and other violations, and received a 16-year federal sentence. Patriarca Jr. himself pled guilty to racketeering in April of 1992 and was sentenced to 8 years, marking the effective end of his leadership and the collapse of Russo's attempted coup. And so with Patriarca Jr. and Russo incarcerated, Boston gangster Frank Salemi emerged as boss of the I almost said Frank Sinatra crime family. Might as well have been. Boss of the Patriarchas, shifting leadership to a new generation. The eternal strife continued throughout the 90s, particularly between factions led by Frank Salemi and other renegade figures like Bobby Carozza, but the organization was significantly weakened by federal action and internal distrust. And the Russo-led faction's upheaval illustrates really how the Patriarcha crime family, how their hierarchical cohesion, once absolute under Patriarcha Sr., fractured when faced with weak centralized authority, pressure from law enforcement, and ambitious captains who were seeking power. And so the attempted coup against Raymond Patriarca Jr. in the late 80s, spearheaded by J.R. Russo and the Boston faction, was really a watershed moment in the decline of the New England Mafia. Unlike decades of disciplined command under Patriarca Sr., the factional violence, negotiated promotions, recorded induction ceremonies, and the sweeping RICO indictments of that era reveal an organization that was really in complete disarray. And Russo's rise and fall reflect both the internal ambitions of the mid-level captain and a broader erosion of mafia authority in America under intensified federal pressure. And the coup ultimately failed not through violence, but through the combined force of eternal betrayal and legal accountability. So we know the differences between senior and junior, night and day differences, both in how they dealt, the cards and how they were each different, albeit putatively. So what could Raymond Jr. have done differently? And if we put ourselves in this situation, how can we benefit ourselves and keep control of our own crime family? How could Raymond Jr. have survived at all? Is there any way at all? And that's what we're going to try to figure out. And that's what we're going to dive into right now. Number one, we know what the coup was about. We've laid it out for you. Patriarca Jr. was too soft for his own men and too soft for his own goddamn good. His power base of Boston no longer backed him, and powerful captains wanted control. John Gotti steps in, he calms the waters, in an effort to subvert war. Russo ends up getting named consigliere of the crime family, which only gives him more power and more autonomy to do what he wants. What Patriarca Jr. should have been doing was placating Russo, but he wasn't. He was kissing his ass. And that's the wrong fucking move. Patriarca Jr.'s inability to enforce rules and his own men bucking the rules and not kicking up created a massive fracture. And the mere fact that he gave Boston carte blanche to sort of act on their own, that negates your control. And when he didn't step in, men saw that as Patriarcha's unwillingness to punish. And if he was unwilling to act then, what would happen if something worse came down the line? And even while Patriarcha had alliances in New York, Florida, and Philadelphia, he failed to control the Boston faction. And he sort of pulled a Paul Castellano too, being heard but not seen, which led to disloyalty and a hands-off approach, which only gave those who wanted the power and the ability, it gave them the ability to essentially grab it. And wiretaps prove his own men, his own powerful captains were questioning his own morale and openly explained that they would do whatever the fuck they wanted, and there was nothing that Raymond Patriarca Jr. could do about it. His own men didn't fear him. And so the question becomes, we're all him. You're him, I'm him, Dean's him, Chris is him, Andrea's him. What do you do differently? Well, I think I have a plan. May not be foolproof, but it's a plan nonetheless. Number one, insulating yourself is not a bad thing, but you have got to be seen. It's just the reality of the game that we're in. From day one out of Jump Street, you have to establish what kind of boss you're going to be. Considering that Patriarca got his position by lineage, not by moving up the ladder, means that he has to be decisive from day one, and he's not. So what would I have done? Well, number one, I act swiftly on anybody stepping sideways. It doesn't mean you have to kill a guy, but you have to make a statement about what's going to be tolerable and what isn't. You punish anybody who sidesteps the other direction immediately. Maybe you tax them. Maybe you shelve them. Maybe you crack them in the head. You break their legs. Maybe you demote them. You have to. Demotions are huge. If a captain is getting wise, you bust them down. You keep them in control. That does one major thing. It proves to the captains that your authority is not going to ever be challenged, and anybody that has the balls to try is going to be punished harshly and swiftly. Fear is one of those things that can be wielded to your advantage if you use it the right way. Fear is more effective, especially if you inherit the position. You almost have to be like Nicky Scarfo. You almost have to be that way. The second thing, you got to build alliances. Who's going to back you if a coup starts? You have to meet with your own men, and in through meeting with them, you build an alliance. You're giving them the time. You're giving them a part of your time. You're making them feel important. And men that are happy and fed rarely complain about the direction you're going. If he brought more of them into the fold, and what I mean by that is treat them like their opinion actually fucking matters. You also have to make good and smart and fair decisions. You can't be too heavy-handed. And in those early days, he had the chance to make sweeping changes and move guys around, but he doesn't. Had he done that, some of what was coming down the river for him might have been second-guessed a bit by Russo and others. They might not have jumped to the immediate conclusion that he was a pussy. Okay? Sorry, I'm not going to blur the lines. The mere fact he did not support his powerful captains or even his own underboss says everything. The hands-off approach does not work. What made John Gotti so strong was that bond between Frankie DeChico and Frankie Loke. You are only as strong as the men that are standing in front of you. You have to be physically there and mitigate issues. But Patriarcha's way was to shovel it off onto other people, which created instability. Think Philadelphia 2.0. And because I know that Boston may be a thorn in my side, I have got to put somebody in there or transfer somebody out there so that they can keep a close eye on what the temperature is. Maybe it's somebody from the Boston faction who I'm tight with, who I can trust, who can be my eyes and ears. And that does two things. Number one, it establishes trust. And it keeps me informed on what Boston is doing and saying. You keep control without them knowing it. So I put in a guy there or grab a guy I trust, and he's going to be my eyes and ears there. That's going to mitigate any issues, because if I find out somebody is acting subversive or is attempting to buck authority, I'm immediately going to deal with it. Immediately. And if you got to kill somebody to prove a point, you kill them. Because that keeps the order of things intact. And the main facet here is punitive. And I think that was a large part of Patriarca Jr.'s issues. His lack or his inability to use murder as an equalizer. And that is why I said any punitive measure taken, even if it didn't involve violence, might have quelled any thoughts by other people in the family of taking over. But because Patriarcha does nothing, it became a free-for-all, and quickly. And I want you guys to get out your pens and paper, because you're never going to, you may not remember what I'm about to say, but this is highly prophetic. There are three tenets that I live by now. There are three tenets I would live by if I was involved in the way in which we're speaking. Number one, authority has to be reinforced continuously. Not when you feel like it, not when the shit hits the fan, 24/7. This way, everybody knows what to expect from you. It's not like you're getting out of pocket and start killing everybody. No, they know. No second chances, no grace period. Handle business immediately. Number 2, our crews, our different factions must both feel loyalty and fear from me. They have to feel like I'm approachable. They have to feel like they can bring a problem to me. They have to feel like they can sit down and have a conversation and not get fucked over. But they also have to fear that if I don't like what they do, I could kill them. And if you do that, that keeps you in tune with number 1, authority being reinforced. Punish, 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 punish. Number 3, our captains must balance decisiveness and diplomacy. And you're only going to achieve that by being seen as a boss and being heard as a boss, but not to your own detriment. Let me say that again. You achieve it by being seen, by being heard, but not to your own detriment. Yes, you need to be heard. They need to see what you're saying, what you're doing. You need to be there in the moment, but you don't put yourself in a shit spot. You have to be fair in mitigating justice. You have to be fair in mitigating beefs. If your men feel they can trust you and you have their best interests in mind, then you're cutting the precancerous tissue off immediately before it can start. And it's not always going to work that way. Sometimes you're going to have to kill a prick to make a point. That's the reality. So, had Raymond Jr. swiftly disciplined early dissenters, he'd have been better off. If he had cultivated alliances with Boston captains, he cuts the problem off. If he increases his visibility and decisiveness, cuts the problem off. If he strengthens his intelligence and preemptive plots, he could have neutralized Russo's faction before it even began to consolidate any power. He could have maintained organizational cohesion, and he could potentially have avoided RICO indictments that later dismantled the family. And so while federal law enforcement pressure was inevitable, it's always going to happen, internal rebellion might have been prevented, allowing Junior Patriarca to regain control longer. Because Patriarca Jr.'s tenure highlights the vulnerabilities of a leadership built on inheritance rather than earned authority. The attempted coup by J.R. Russo and other Boston captains succeeded not because Patriarca Jr. lacked power, but because he failed to maintain it and use it. And key survival strategies that he neglected was consolidating fear and enforcing discipline, building alliances across factions, maintaining personal presence and visibility, strengthening intelligence networks, and using violence strategically as a deterrent. And the collapse of Patriarca Jr.'s authority serves really more of a cautionary tale in organized crime leadership, that power must be continuously exercised, not assumed. And so what are the key differences between the father and son post the coup? Well, the coup. In 1984, Raymond Patriarca Sr. dies. Junior inherits it. Junior assumes leadership relies on inherited authority, but he lacks all street credibility. In 85, the organization is still nominally intact. However, after the coup, Boston captains J.R. Russo begin testing authority's semi-autonomous operations. In 85, early acts of insubordination, which leads to Vincent Lamoli and Teddy Burns getting murdered. In 87, Patriarca Jr. is still trying to maintain his authority, and Boston factions consolidate power. J.R. Patriarca begins losing visibility and influence. By 88, there is no decisive action. Junior Patriarca relies on middlemen. J.R. Russo openly challenges authority. Meetings and plots are recorded by the FBI. In 89, attempted negotiations with Boston captains, and Russo's faction attacks underboss William Grasso and Frank Salemi. There's internal violence. October 29th, Medford, Massachusetts induction ceremony. The FBI records all of that. 1990, Patriarca Jr. nominally is still the boss. Family structure is falling. Federal RICO indictment returned against Patriarca Jr. J.R. Russo and Nicky Bianco, who was, I knew Nicky, but that's besides the point. In 91, Junior's authority erodes, unable to enforce anything. Patriarca Jr. pleads guilty to RICO-related charges, sentenced to 8 years. Russo pleads guilty as well to his crimes. Post-1999, the family structure largely begins to dismantle, and the Boston faction, Frank Salemi, rises, and Providence faction weakens, and there's a lack of organizational cohesion. So get out your maps again if you still have them there, because I'm going to roll through the second part of the map. There was actually 2 maps. I think I told you guys to look at the wrong one. But anyway, look at your maps again. I'll wait 10 seconds. Pull your maps out. Go ahead and just pause me. Pull your maps out. Okay, so all looking at your map, the green zone is the Providence zone, okay? The location is Providence, downtown, Pawtucket, and Cranston. The activities are gambling, loan sharking, labor rackets, and some extortion. Leadership is junior plus loyal Providence captains. The status was 84 to 89, nominally under Patriarca Jr., but loyalty was declining. And a critical event was Billy Grasso getting hit in 89, which weakens enforcement signals. If you look at the red is what we're going to call the Boston zone. Should be on the right-hand side of your map. You should see a photo of J.R. Russo. And the location is South Boston, Dorchester, Quincy, and Revere. The activities would have been extortion, gambling, construction unions, infiltration of legitimate businesses, and the leadership was J.R. Russo, followed by Frank Salemi, etc. Status 85 to 89, increasingly independent, plotted against Providence leadership. And if you look at those critical events, Russo orchestrates factional attacks. Boston crew participates in violent acts like shooting Frank Salemi, and captured on FBI wiretap October 29th of 89 for an induction ceremony. So we're going to talk about the color coding really quickly. Let me just make this a little bigger. Okay, so continue to look at your maps. The color coding, green zoning is Providence headquarters and surrounding Rhode Island towns. Red is Boston and the South Shore area. Yellow is transitional areas where Providence influence is contested, albeit Pawtucket through Attleboro border towns. If you look at the icons on the map, these are what they mean. If you see 2 swords crossed, those are key factional attacks and murders. If you see like a guy with a hat, those are FBI wiretap locations, albeit Medford and Boston meetings. If you look at the red circle, that's going to be Boston rebellious captains. If you look at the blue square that sort of turned like a diamond, that's loyal Providence captains. And then there's like a piece of paper, and those are RICO indictments and arrests. So if you look at 84, and this is the timeline overlay on the map that you have, Patriarca Sr. dies, Jr. takes Providence headquarters, which is the green, and that dominates. 85 to 86, Boston begins autonomous operations, and the red coloring starts spreading. In 1998, FBI surveillance detects open plotting in Boston. 89, attacks on Grasso and Frank Salemi. Red zone expands their influence. So the red zone begins to move left and right, up and down. October of 89, induction ceremony in Medford. Federal surveillance captures Russo's dominance. 90 to 92, RICO indictments. Both zones get weakened, and Providence loses centralized control. And that's one of the problems we've always talked about when it comes to Providence. They keep moving their base operations from Providence to the north end. And that's a problem. That's a problem. And so what's the strategic analysis of all of this? Well, Providence weakness, right? They rely on symbolic authority. They're slow to punish insubordination. What made Boston strong was they were ambitious, they were coordinated, and they were partially shielded from Providence's headquarters from their oversight. Out of sight, out of mind, that kind of thing. The coup success factor, well, the Boston crew used territorial autonomy and coordination and federal ignorance to force legal and operation collapse of Junior's leadership. And the lesson here is the geographic decentralization and weak enforcement allowed factions to challenge central authority. So what does all of this fucking mean? Well, it simply means that Raymond Patriarca Jr.'s tenure as the head of the New England Mafia stands as a cautionary tale. In the history of organized crime, inheriting the empire from his father, he assumed the title of immense power but lacked the strategic acumen, personal authority, or fear-based control that made his father such an untouchable figure. His reliance on symbolic authority His failure to enforce discipline, his inability to cultivate strong alliances with Boston factions, and neglect of intelligence and surveillance networks created a perfect storm for that rebellion. And the coup led by J.R. Russo and other ambitious Boston captains exposed these vulnerabilities. Factional violence, assassinations of key underbosses, and open plotting undermined Junior's control and ultimately drew federal RICO prosecutions, which dismantled much of the family's centralized power. And despite holding the formal title of boss, Raymond Patriarca Jr. was rendered a figurehead, incapable of asserting a decisive leadership that was needed to maintain cohesion. And faced with the collapse of his authority, mounting indictments, and the rise of more capable gangsters like Frank Salemi, Patriarca Jr. effectively left the Mafia world, serving his prison sentence and retreating from active organized crime. And that story illustrates that in the mob, as in any other hierarchical sort of high-risk organization, inheritance of power is meaningless without the ability to enforce it. And that weakness at the top invites both internal rebellion and external intervention. And ultimately, Raymond Patriarca Jr.'s failures, they highlight a timeless lesson. And this is the lesson for today. Legacy alone cannot and will not ever protect a leader. Authority must be continuously earned, exercised, and respected. And without that, you cannot control. I'll read it again. Legacy alone cannot, will not ever protect a leader. Authority must be continuously earned, exercised, and respected. And the fall of Raymond Patriarca Jr. signaled not just the end of the one boss's reign, but the actual decline of the Providence-based Patriarca crime family as the dominant force in New England organized crime. And so there you have it. I gave you the coup, the reasons for it. I compared the two men, the father and son. I told you what I would do differently. So now I'm going to throw it back to you. What would you do differently? Reach out to us at mobtalkradioshow@gmail.com and let us know. Jake, do not forget to send me that list. And I think that's going to be it for the day. Have a good weekend. If you're in the Northeast like me, enjoy the snow. And stay safe. It's going to be brutally cold out there. I'll be watching the Crackhead Olympics out my window. Yes, that should be fun. Thanks for listening in. And do me a favor. As always, share. That's the best thing you can do, is share this.